Escalating Nastiness. I'm going to turn this into a public service announcement with an invitation at the end. So I'm going to lay down some context this way. Mark Twain, back in like the 19th century, said, if you're going to write an angry letter, now obviously this is before social media, if you're going to write an angry letter, wait 3 days before sending it. Now the rationale behind that was that across those 3 days, you will likely cool your heels, you will likely emotionally simmer down and chill out some, and you will then not likely feel the need to send that angry letter. You would have had enough time to self-reflect. Why is this important? Because self-reflection has been dying at an escalating rate thanks to our screens. The very device that I'm using to record this video, which I also use to make phone calls on and write messages on text and WhatsApp and all of that. This device that allows for so much in our modern lives can keep us from engaging in self-reflection. Because these days, for every single little thought that we have, for every single little emotion that we feel, for every single little impulse that we experience, we can now turn to the screen, find our tribe, our echo chamber really, and find validation even for some of the most questionable thoughts, feelings, and impulses. Now we're human. We're going to feel stuff. Things are going to trigger stuff within us. We're going to experience things in the outside world that will cause us to feel a certain way. But of course, just because you feel a certain way does not mean that you are right. Just means, if anything, you're self-righteous and you're having a period of uglier, darker self-righteousness. And self-righteousness doesn't make you right. It just makes you self-righteous. So with that wisdom, which doesn't apply directly today physically, but we can apply it, the wisdom of Mark Twain in waiting 3 days before sending that angry letter. Most people don't even wait 3 minutes or even 3 seconds before the angry social media comment, from YouTube to Instagram to so on, TikTok and all that. And these platforms, even with their algorithms, have a tendency of triggering certain states within us. Again, questionable, even downright unhealthy states. Anger, typically speaking, especially if it becomes rage, is not a healthy emotion. Doesn't mean that you don't feel it. Doesn't mean that you try to push it down. But it also doesn't mean that you're supposed to just publicly puke it. And so, with that wisdom of waiting 3 days before sending the angry letter, how could that apply today? The way I see it is, there's something I learned from cognitive behavioral therapy called a thought model. That it all begins with a thought. There's some thought that starts the cycle, and it goes from thought to emotion to action to result. And that can be a closed loop unless you exit the loop or create another loop, disrupt the pattern in some way. So, like I said, it's going to be a public service announcement on escalating nastiness, because I remember learning this in a 4-day program at Leadership Academy led by Joseph McClendon, but it was a Tony Robbins program back in 2019. And I did the last one that was in person pre-COVID. And he gave a whole history on nastiness, because apparently he was considering doing a reality TV show. And the history was interesting. I mean, just going back to the 90s, beginning with Jerry Springer, to then going into reality TV, to now it's social media, where it has become okay, more than okay. It is downright encouraged to be nasty, unkind, put another way, toward people, complete strangers. And of course, it gets amplified by the phony courage from the distance that our devices create, because it's not like you have the person in front of you. But if you did have the person in front of you, and you were then compelled internally to contain yourself more, your emotions, you may find that there's nothing really evil or wrong with this person. You may have some fundamental disagreements with, But that doesn't mean you got to vilify them and become their victim, because every victim needs their villain. And I'm talking about volunteer victims. I'm not talking about legitimate victims of actual evil done by individuals. I'm talking about just the volunteer victims, and you just see it puked all over the place. And that's the time that we're living in. Escalating nastiness is what I'm calling it. And we've got a history of it, I think, beginning in the 90s and just going on to today. And it's never helpful to be so unkind and to project it through phony courage on social media platforms that are not, as Dave Chappelle once said about Twitter, it's not a real place. So that's the PSA portion, and then here's the invitation portion that I said that I would bring. Next time you feel triggered by something that you see on social media, try tabling your reaction or your comment, reply, response, or whatever, and see if you give it a few minutes. Maybe step away from it. That alone will keep you from scrolling so much. Maybe step away from it and take a few minutes to take a breath and to check in with what you're feeling. Because again, just because you feel a certain way, that does not mean that you're right. It simply means that you are going through a feeling state right now. Nothing more. It's not right. It's not wrong. Could be incredibly unhealthy if you allow it to escalate and go from thought to emotion, and that thought generates a lot of emotional momentum, and it starts to feel really real, especially when you're by yourself and you're not looking in the mirror, because that's what self-reflection is meant to be. You look in the mirror metaphorically, but these days less and less people are looking in the mirror, and more of us are looking at the screens. So my invitation is, start checking in with those thoughts, with those emotions as they rise. And I'm reading a great book called Positive Intelligence, and I'm going to be doing a program on it with a few friends of mine soon. Highly recommend the book, by the way. And see about cultivating some mindfulness, like intentionally stopping, really hitting the big old pause button before you react. Before you put up, it could be your initial post is a reaction. Is it really worth it? And for me, the gauge is it going to be a contribution in some way? Is it going to serve people in some way? Is it going to help people in some way? And I'm not saying that it's always got to be nice. There are some very difficult things we got to deal with in this world. And sometimes you just got to express that stuff. But really take a moment before any reactions. You know what the reactions are, and you'll get better at it if you take that moment, if you intentionally stop, if you just hit that big old pause button and not react. And maybe as you step back, allow yourself to bring some kindness to the situation. So that's my PSA and my invitation. And as always, stay engaged.